Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm Druart, UFI Research Manager, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all for this online conference. Today's session follows up the release last week of the AIPC UFI report on temporary emergency facilities, as it felt important to present the report and hear from the news directly involved. The topic is clearly on the agenda everywhere in the world, and earlier this morning, we already had more than 200 registrations for this session from 44 countries, from Albania to Vietnam, from Australia to USA. Before I pass over to Aloysius and Kai for a few words of welcome, I would like to provide some practical elements, including an important remark for questions and answers. First, we muted your microphones, and we will unmute them for those who are invited to speak. My colleagues Karen and Pascal are in the background, and they are doing this for us. Second, if you have a question for a speaker or a general question, please use the chat function. But note that you will not get an answer immediately. Indeed, when preparing this meeting and checking the notes from the registrations, we realized that it made sense to extend the series of cases in order to provide an as wide as possible range of experiences and potential contacts from around the world. So we replaced the Q&A sessions with cases from 6 additional countries. Having said that, your questions will still be answered, but via another session that we plan to organize later. We hope that this scheme will prove to be more efficient for all. Last point, this session is recorded and it will be made available with the slides after the meeting on the UFI website, UFI Connect sections. That's it for the introduction. I will now ask Aloysius, AIPC President, to welcome you on behalf of AIPC, and then pass over to Kai Attendorf, CEO of UFI.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to colleagues. Since COVID-19 began about 3 months ago, AIPC and UFI came together to develop 2 guides. One is on Guide to Facility Management in a Pandemic, and the other is Guide to Temporary Emergency Use. We have made these guides available to all AIPC and UFI members. And for the first time, we have also agreed to release these guides to the industry as a whole, given its broader applicability. The latest guide, which was released mid last week, is specific to convention centers and exhibition centers being repurposed to managing temporary emergency use. A recent AIPC survey of members showed that 25% of member centers are already engaged in temporary emergency uses, with a further 30% in discussions for such a conversion. This would mean over half of all centers worldwide could be involved as the pandemic evolves. While the majority of conversions so far has been hospital and medical related, centers are also being called upon to support many other users, from shelters and housing to food preparation and staging or testing areas. The guide therefore addresses a range of possibilities. All of the guides have benefited from the contributions and vetting by a task force which comprised knowledgeable AIPC members with relevant experience and expertise. And this task force was enhanced with the addition of a number of similarly qualified UFI members for the 2 COVID-related guides, and that was a great enhancement. The guides are not an end in themselves, but also incorporate many links and references to other resources that provide additional information. We look forward to further contribution from AIPC and UFI members as experiences grow, and we ask that you communicate this to us so that they can be added to future updates and enhance the body of knowledge that is accumulating. I wish everyone a fruitful session ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Aloysius. Let me pick up right there. Hello, this is Kai Appendorf from Bonn, Germany today, and good evening, Singapore, and good morning, America. It's great to have everyone connected again on this UFI Connect session. You already gave all the background, so there's very little left for me to say, as always when I have the honor to speak after you, Aloysius, but I want to especially thank all the members of the AIPC and UFI communities that participated in this project. If a year ago someone had said that global trade associations are able to put together guides of this quality and this depth within a few working days, people would have smiled at us and said, yes, please dream on. This is another excellent example of how a really, really unique and difficult situation like COVID-19 empowers our industry to come together, to collaborate, and to work together on the best possible way to facilitate the first aid responders, to facilitate the health systems, to facilitate our respective governments and institutions while we are all battling this outbreak. And what better use can we make of the venues that normally provide the meeting places and the marketplaces for the industries of the world, than to right now make them available as healing places and treatment places for the world as we combat this virus. This is a people's industry. These guides are a great testament to the power of collaboration, people working together for the greater good. However, I will be the first one to cheer the closure of the last of these temporary facilities on the other side of COVID-19, when we get ready to reutilize these buildings for what we built them for, to host the meetings and the marketplaces of the world. Let's hope this day comes rather sooner than later, but until then, let's do what we can to do our part to help us all to get through this pandemic. And with that, Christian, back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Aloysius and Kai, for this introduction. So our first speaker today is Glen Schoen. Glen is CEO of the Boardroom at Crisis, who produced the report. The report is available on the UFI research website if you go into the specific industry topic section. So Glen, please introduce yourself first and include your background, please.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be able to speak today. I'm Glen Schoen. I'm half Dutch, half American. I'm speaking to you from The Hague in the Netherlands. I have roughly 35 years experience working on crisis management and security issues, and I've had the privilege of assisting UFI and the AIPC for roughly the past 2 years with several of their programs. This is the second report we were able to put out, thanks to the joint task force of AIPC and UFI on safety, security, and now the addition of some health and management experts. What I'd like to do at this point is switch over to full screen here. I would like to highlight a number of the points in the report. I'm not going to go through it point by point. You all hopefully have direct access to it now. I do, however, want to emphasize a number of the points that are brought forward in here. And when we look at the document, the first thing we just wanted to stress here was the values that underlined our writing. So the idea here was to make something, when we look at convention and exhibition centers being used as a temporary emergency facility, to look at that in a multi-purpose sense. Right now, obviously, the focus is COVID-19 worldwide for the industry. However, when we look back the last 20, 30 years, we know there's been many reasons, from hurricanes and storms to floods and earthquakes, where we've seen centers used for a different purpose than what they were intended for. Again here, general picture is multi-purpose, but this particular document, the focus definitely has been on COVID-19. We've tried to tap into recent knowledge. There are a number of documents, reports, academic writings out there in the world that do offer some good knowledge and insight on this, but it's been hard to find. Very little of it specifically focused on the convention or exhibition trade. So we haven't just gone and looked through all the old literature there. for that trade, but especially we've tried to look at what's new and what's recent. We started this effort on 1 April. We completed it, I believe, on the 13th of April. And from there, we've really tried to input as much new knowledge and recent knowledge as possible. We've also tried to be as international in the spread and scope. We have good practice from Latin America to Asia to Europe to North America. We've been able to gather good, useful, purposeful information here far and wide, and we wanted to include as much of that as possible. We also put an emphasis on sort of the practical things. What were the managers struggling with? What are the people in facility management struggling with? What were the people who were organizing events struggling with? So that's the frontline experience we try to put in. And finally, we try to use a degree of high applicability. And what we mean by that is that it's useful knowledge that you can apply as quick as possible. Can we go back one slide, please? I think we're running through. There we go. So just wanted to stress we had tremendous contribution, wide range of groups. And personally, I'm very, very grateful. It was 6-7 days of constant work, hundreds of emails and phone calls literally to get all this information together, but very grateful for the effort. Okay, if we can go on to the next section, please. When we look at the major sections of this report, one was to sort of place a context of what's the situation you're in when you're used for an emergency purpose. The second was the idea of how do we set it up? The third is how do we operate it? The fourth one, how do we end it? How do we draw it down? So in the context section here, one of the first things you really find is the situation where a center has a choice versus not having a choice. There are those situations where the government, the military, the police, the mayor's office will come in and demand use of your facility. That's happened many times before, particularly in storm situations. Here, of course, we have a bit more of a choice. And the important thing there is when we look at COVID-19 and the repurposing of centers, the first thing we notice is mostly it's for emergency medical use, secondarily for housing, and third, we're now also seeing it used a lot as a testing site. And in a few cases, we're also seeing a combination of this. So when I mention here securing your own position, what we noticed were a number of people from Ian Taylor to Mr. Pazzali in Birmingham and in Milan, respectively, really stressing the fact it's important that you, as the leadership of one of these centers, claim your own position and take your own position and don't just leave it to the government to tell you what to do or when to do it. So having a participatory effort with a small agile management team where you're working together. And in looking at participating in an effort like this together with local health authorities or the military or city officials, always think safety first, particularly now that you're looking at COVID-19. Think about how can you minimize your liabilities. Those may be insurance, they may be legal, they may be compliance, but it's a bit of an elephant in the room as is covering costs. The important thing is that you actually go to the authorities and seek to address it as early as possible. It's also important, a lesson we've learned for when you try to restore operations back to normal, is that you can make use of that site as quickly as possible once it's freed up again and it's done with its emergency purpose. Covering costs, again here, imagine that you're being asked to step into this. If you don't address it, and it may take some time to get it addressed in terms of an agreement, but you're going to run into a couple of problems. And for instance, when I talked to Michiel Middendorf of the World Forum in The Hague, he stressed the fact, don't look at it as a money issue, look at it as an operations issue. You are going to have problems with your operation if you have not figured out right from the start who's going to be paying for what. You're going to run out of money. The people you're trying to pay are going to run out of money. You're going to have problems with staff. You're going to have problems with supplies. So make sure that you try to address that as upfront and honest from the beginning as you can. Finally there, realize that everybody there is operating to some extent in an uncertain situation. It's going to be certain that you're going to have uncertainty. So get used to the fact, be flexible, be agile, and be understanding when it comes to that point. On to the next slide, please. As part of that uncertainty, be prepared that as you're being taken into use, as you're being prepared for an emergency role, this can be a rather fast and furious process. Most locations that are taken up, whether it's emergency housing or an emergency hospital, this happens in several days to maybe 10 days. That's been the biggest average span so far of conversion. And you're going to have hundreds of people suddenly coming in, trying to take charge of different parts of an operation. They're not going to be familiar with your place. You're not going to be familiar with them. So be prepared that this can be quite a process of magnitude that requires some mental strength on your part as well. Next image, please. When we look at the process of actually setting up, what you see, and in the next slides, I'll try to highlight this a little bit, but think about the sequence of activities that you have to go through and that you want to go through. These first three bullets are sort of intermingled, but what you want to be thinking about is that there are certain steps. The government will likely engage you. You will go into some initial planning discussions about what's possible with your conference center or exhibition hall. You'll be looking at informing the public, informing other authorities that it may be happening. So there are some good steps that you can take, and they're outlined under Chapter 2 in setting up as a TEF. One very useful document we found was from the WHO, which looks at the functionality that you need. So when you think about things like logistics, command and control, human resources, continuity of operations, all these are important functions that you want to make sure work properly, whether you become an emergency housing site or whether you become a hospital. Very important, the number of people stress is that you get everybody involved from the start. We heard this from Ms. Bettini in Milan, we heard it from Birmingham, we heard it from the United States, we heard it from Asia. But to get all the key people who might be involved, if you're going to build a hospital, make sure you have the medical specialists, the medical doctors, the equipment people right there from the beginning. If you leave some party out, somebody is going to have to play catch up, or they won't be aligned with whatever's being planned. Now, when we look at communication, that of course falls apart in two main areas. It's internal communication, external communication. And it's important there that you keep considering and stressing to yourself that communication is key to make sure things run as smoothly as they possibly can. On the internal side, think about your own staff, think about enthusing people, but also keeping people on message, keeping people on schedule, and making sure that people can have some level of expectation of what's coming, who they might be working with, what might be happening that day. It all goes to facilitate a process. Cuts down on a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, a lot of WhatsApps, and a lot of confusion. Towards the outside, you want to be considering your own position as well as that as the community or the government. So think about your own stakeholders, think about your own clients, think about the public that you've served over the years in your community for events. You want to make sure people know what's happening, that people know you're dedicating time and effort to this, and therefore are not going to be bothering you with side issues or insignificant matters at a time where you really want to focus on your core effort. When we look at safety and security, of course, with COVID, safety is front and center, but think about it in all facets. You're literally going to suddenly have hundreds of people probably moving around in your facility. They're going to be attaching things to the walls, to the ceilings. Trucks are moving in and out. There's going to be a lot more traffic than you're used to. And your normal safety regulations, I won't say that they'll go out the window, but there will be some level of flexibility needed here on how you run things. So it's important you do pay attention to that. And you do as much as you can to foster a good safety culture. I'm sure some of the speakers later will attest to that as well. On the security front, the same thing. We don't want strangers walking in there, people who don't belong there, people who might want to steal supplies or equipment. We want to make sure that access control is in place and that security in a general sense so people can work safely in that environment is assured as much as possible. When we look at practicalities, this is where we find out the section in the report, which is on pages 14 and 15, like detailed checklists and detailed guidance. If you could do the next slide, please. So that's where we're really talking about the how-to. What are the steps to make this facility? What do I need to think about? What's the sequence in which I want to be doing things? And we found a lot of very useful new knowledge that's been developed. We're also seeing both among architects and engineers who are helping convention and exhibition centers. We're seeing a new language, if you will. I won't say that the British at this moment are globally leading in the hospital trade, but the terminology they use for first scoping out, then laying out, then fitting out, and then equipping a site. Those 4 steps we're seeing more and more in a lot of this knowledge. And you see sort of some of this explained in the information that's attached. Also think in practical terms, what kind of new things am I going to be experiencing here in my location that I don't normally have or run into? Biohazardous waste is just one of those things. Or right now, when you're setting up a facility like this, your workers will have to think about, in this COVID-19 environment, what's a safe way even to go to lunch? What's a safe way to have a briefing? And we're seeing good practice developed on that in a number of places on a number of fronts. I would add, when you're looking at practicalities, that some of these things are going to be totally new. One of the managers I talked to in one of the facilities in the United States mentioned simply the fact that they've never run their location on a 24/7 basis. They always closed in the evening after the last event or show. It was always shut down at night, and now it's 24/7, go, go, go. We have people working on a night schedule where they've never worked on before. So think about some of these practicalities and try to put as much of this in the information as we could find. Next slide, please. Also, please look into the details in the reports when you look at the links. So a lot of the members that contributed have already distilled some of the lessons learned and the knowledge they've gained. They've packaged that, they've empowered it. It's a lot of it's very concentrated, and whether it's literally lessons learned or our experience, as we're seeing here on some of the slides, I think you'll encounter from the Fiera Milano, or whether it's in how things were done. A lot of information is going to be in the details of the links we're providing in the report. All right, on to the next. So when we're looking at actually operating as a TEF, we're going into those moments where you're running 24/7, and whether you're housing people or you're feeding people or you're a medical facility, when we look at operations, as you'll see on the next slide, there's a couple of key things you want to be thinking about. One is to somehow do keep track, if only to have a record, not just later for insurance purposes, but also to help you manage. Try to track, try to log, try to monitor as best as possible with your management team all the things that are happening, and try to foresee where are we going to have problems, where are we going to have shortages, where might we need help, and can we ask for that in a timely fashion so we don't have an interruption of the process. A lot of people mentioned the importance of good practice on enforcing a routine. You're going to be doing an unusual thing. Your facility is going to be looking like an unusual setting, running a COVID hospital, a non-COVID hospital, an ICU unit. Try to enforce routine. Look at, can we do meetings with all staff in the morning? Can we do a briefing moments? Can we have a daily bulletin that goes out? Can we as staff eat together in the canteen at lunch and dinner? But try to enforce a routine. This is also crucially important when we look at COVID-19 for the work from home workforce, the WFH routine. And it's important that the people that will be supporting you and working from home also feel involved, are involved, know about your issues, know about your timelines. So it's important to draw them into routines there as well during operations. We've outlined a number of key procedures that we hear people refer to. You can find those in the report. A number of those procedures also, the previous document put out by AIPC and UFI about a month ago on COVID-19 has a number of those in there. So I urge you to take a look at that document as well. Now, the media is mentioned here. We look at the media in a positive sense. Also during these emergencies, a lot of the time they're there because of human interest. They want to show how well your convention center or exhibition hall is assisting things. They will be looking at how you are helping people, how you are assisting people. Remember, though, also that the media has a controlling role, if you will, not so much towards you, but maybe towards the government. Is money not being wasted? Are people being treated well? So there is also the possibility there that you have to be careful you don't get in a jam with somebody taking pictures of things that maybe you don't want to have out in the open. In other words, managing the media, assisting the media in as positive a way as you can is important. And finally, security, not just in the setup, but also the operations turns out to be important. Of course, here where we have this overemphasis on COVID-19 at the moment, that may be slightly lesser concern in some respects than, for instance, if you have the aftermath of a hurricane and you have people fleeing who maybe haven't eaten for 3 or 4 days and trying to break into a food supply or a room where you have your medicine stored. But also here with COVID-19, think about issues. We don't want any interruption in medical facilities of any kind, if at all possible. We don't want the privacy of patients or people you're trying to assist being breached. And particularly on the cyber front, we've seen in a number of cases now where also cyber criminals are trying to break into medical facilities or indeed into convention centers, trying to steal data, steal identities, gain credit cards, but also sometimes simply sabotage the matter. So cyber security is definitely something to focus on, and it's also something to assist the government with. Put it to their attention that you're having problems with your Wi-Fi network. Let them know somebody from the outside might be seeking to break in, and get that assistance from government if you can in keeping things safe. All right, as we move on, and we're thinking about the post phase, and here we're coming into sort of a bit more of the positive angle of things, standing down as a temporary emergency facility. So here, I would first like to stress that there is a fair body of knowledge on how to recover from various forms of disasters or crises. A lot of different countries have put out national programs and plans over the years after devastating storms, floods. For instance, Australia has done a lot of very good work the last few months in putting out new guidance on how to recover from wildfires with all the problems they had over the December, January, February period. So I would just say we've referred to a number of these inside the guidance, but also look in the resources section and you will be able to find a lot more. I'll come back to that point in just a second. We're finding in good practice, not just trying to rebuild the business, we're cleaning up the halls, we're maybe decorating it anew, and we're going to be reopening and we want to get back to our event business, but also think about, can you have a moment where you have a significant ceremony of closure to the crisis, where in fact you're saying to the world and the community around you and all your clients and customers, we are now commemorating what we've had, we're remembering what had. In the worst case, of course, you might have had people who literally passed away in your facility, as we've had following various terrible storms, but also if you're going to be used as a hospital, maybe people pass away there. Then it would be nice and it would be useful to have some form of a remembrance ceremony to provide closure to the period that you just had. Right after that, you might want to think about, can we have something to celebrate? Can we have something that marks our rebirth, our reopening for customers? And everybody knows we're back in business. And that can be a celebratory event. It could be a virtual event. It could be inviting the mayor and having a ribbon cut, but to have something to mark the new start. And of course, that in and of itself can be used to generate positive news for your facility and let people know you're back in business. Think about all these aspects also as you develop marketing. As we look at the next slide, what you see in there is that there's a lot of this best practice out there and evolving, as I just referred to a moment ago. Different countries, different continents, putting out a lot of good stuff. Some of this material is also coming from the insurance industry, and that's another good resource to look at. And indeed, a fair number of these plans, like the Disaster Recovery Toolkit you see here from January of 2020 from Australia, a lot of this good material now also includes ideas around marketing, how to market opening up again, how to maybe market and play into new strengths. We saw the example mentioned in the report of one of the exhibition centers in Hong Kong, where very smartly they've looked at new client demand around safe air systems and hygiene because of COVID-19. So they are also using that now to position themselves strongly in the market as a safe location for you to have your event in a period after COVID-19. All right, and the next slide simply emphasizes that a lot of the material that's being put out by governments, local governments, but also national governments, is based on the better and better known ISO and international standards on crisis management and business continuity. And I would particularly want to draw your attention to the list on the right. You often find that in these documents that this is the list of the core assets, facilities, people that you need to be thinking about when we're looking at restoring regular operations. And normally speaking, almost all of these focus areas where you might have a risk of something not working, where you might have the repairs still to be done, a lot of these areas are covered in the better standard documents that you can acquire. All right. Let me go on to the next slide. And I just wanted to talk about the fact that we're seeing also a growing number of members now, even as they're in the middle of this challenging period of emergency use, are already also thinking about how can I start up later? And we're getting new thinking on this in the business world, in the commercial world, also in the government world. Should I later try to open up right away again? Should I do it in several big steps? Should I refurbish my whole convention center, clean it up, and then go back to normal all at once? There is a lot of thinking on this being developed right now. And some of it, including some of it I saw, for instance, the other day at the World Forum here in The Hague, new business models being incorporated. So I'm certain amongst all the membership, we'll be getting some additional thoughts on, you know, partially physical exhibits and maybe partially virtual. Business models, the new business models are being developed now by the trade that you may want to tap into for the future. Okay, and then as a final slides here, I just wanted to re-emphasize the fact that on the next slide, right now we're in an unknown period still for many of you. Literally, there is no International Standards Organization standard and no national standards for exactly how do I restart? What are my steps? What do I do first? We're seeing a lot of good material, a lot of checklists, a lot of think about, but there is not yet one body of conventional wisdom or one document to go to and to say, these are the 12 steps to follow and here's the 43 things you need to do. The point I wanted to make with this slide in closing is simply that this is still a living document. I'm very grateful, and everybody's grateful who all in the AIPC and UFI has contributed to this. As it's a living document and as you yourself are developing now in real time more of these good practices, I would just urge you to please share those with the team from AIPC, with the team from UFI, and we will endeavor to see if we can make an update on this and meld some more of your knowledge to make it available to the global membership. Okay, and with that, I'd like to close and hand it back over to Christian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I think you provided a very impressive overview of your document with a lot of very important takeaways, I believe. Our second speaker today comes from Italy. We all know that Lombardia was severely hit first in Europe, and I'm very thankful to Mr. Enrico Pazzali, the president of the Fondazione Fiera Milano, to have accepted to speak today. Please, Mr. Pazzali.
So thank you very much, Glenn, and thank you very much to all of you and dear colleagues. So I'm the president of Fondazione Fiera Milano, and work in this sector for 15 years. So I'm starting Fiera Milano for 8 years after in the Congress Center in Rome, and now I come back to my previous girlfriends, Fiera Milano. I would like to explain our experience, but this is really the most complex experience we live in our life, not only from the technical point of view, but above all from the sentiment we feel during these 15 days that just going to the end now. I try to take up the, just a second. Okay. Is okay? Do you see my presentation? No. I try again. Okay. Now? Okay, fine. So first, we are not going to build up a temporary facility, but when we start this project was to create something that able to support the emergency of not 1 month or 6 months, but able to support all the emergency in terms of timing. Probably you know that this emergency and this virus is going not to disappear next month or at the end of the year, but many scientists suppose that this crisis and these emergencies, we have to live with them, with it for a long time. We hope not, but we have to face the reality of what the scientist is going to tell to us. And for this reason, we start this emergency in a way not to cover a temporary, in terms of month, facility, but to build up something that can use for the next few years. Just to give you some numbers in terms of complexity, we build up in these 10 days facility for more than 20 million euro, with achieving more than 200 ICU beds, and able to support around 1,000 people to support these temporary emergency facilities. And we use 2 pavilions of Fiera Milano with 24,000 square meters. And just to give another complexity was how many people, 800, and how many companies we use to build up this facility in these 10 days. Just to give you the curve of what's happened to Lombardia, we start 2 months ago with no cases with the first cases, and with the lockdown in March of the 9th of March for Italy. After this lockdown, we start with the government to thinking how to support this emergency in terms of facilities. And when we started the fundraising campaign the 18th of March, and after that we start the construction, and we finish the construction, the first phases, by the end of the month with 53 ICU beds. The first patient is entered in the 7th of April, and now we are going to face another phases, not the emergency, but the downsize on the curve allow us to support much more better these cases in terms of facility. But what we are doing now is to not only to finish and to close this project as we planned, but also to think how to face the reordinary of the hospital in Milano and in Lombardy using this facility, but above all to forecast the new emergency that the scientists say to us that we start after the finish of lockdown or in September or in October. So now we are able now to have this facility in order to face a real COVID hospital, able to take all the high-level care assistance for this patient. This patient is not the COVID put in the hospital, but is the patient that fights their life, because I don't know if you have if you know the number, but the 50% of this patient that go into this intensive therapy will not receive to going back to life. So for this reason, we built this kind of facility with a high level of quality and specific materials and all the commitment and the address that the doctors and the scientists tell us to do. Just to give you some timing, we started the preliminary planning by the mid of March, and after 10 days, after 14 times of change of the project, we delivered the project in the first phases. So what we have to think, and in the emergency period, what you have to do is to be very flexible, very fast, and very able. We worked for all the night for 40 to 24 hours a day for 20 days, in order to face this kind of changes that the doctors and the people, specialists on that, call us to do after 1 or 2 days for time. First, you know that the hospital sector, the health sector is managed by public. So what we are facing first is to manage this kind of thing in the private way. Fondazione Fiera Milano, and Fiera Milano is a private company, and we decide to take the risk and to produce this kind of project with public fundraising, without no public fund. And to start this project alone, achieving these goals, and after that to give for free to the public hospital what we produce in these 10 days. We produce also a really huge technical team and involvement medical staff from the beginning of the project, in order to create what they are needed to facing this kind of emergency. Just to give you this photo, in order to represent you that this kind of oxygen plan is the largest oxygen plan in Italy. There is this is the effort that the biggest hospital in Italy, and this kind of equipment is 4 times the largest big hospital in Italy for this kind of therapies. Just to give another thing, as you understand, there is a very complicated layout in order to separate the red light to the green light, in order to not mix the COVID risk to the people that work in the hospital. I speak about nurse and doctors. And to do that, we are facing a very complex work for specialists in order to create safe place and safe area in order to cure this kind of patient. So this is one of the things we are facing, and what we can suggest if you face this kind of emergency is to take on board immediately one hospital on the hospital that we manage this kind of facility after creating this kind of thing. I would like, this is the second phases, and the third phases, I don't want to put a lot of words on that. If you need some other information, we are able to do everything in terms of design, planning, and all the standards we use for that. But what we would like to do is to face some photos in order to, I try to do this complex thing. Okay, no? Did you see?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, that's fine.
It's okay? Lo vedete?
No, sì.
You see, this is the therapy intensive in which you can find inside the bed. This is the finished work after the 10 days. This is inside the 104 beds, and this is one of the intensive therapy we finished last week. This is only the first, is the sort of the first day, but as you know, there is a lot of equipment and technology. We are facing also a huge technology facility as a Wi-Fi and high-speed Wi-Fi built up with Cisco, directly with Cisco, in order to provide and share information with the patient. This is the red light corridor, and this is just to give an example. This is the place in which the doctors change themselves in order to go to the job. I think to stay in the time that Glenn told me before. If you have any question for that, I'm available to share everything in terms of planning, design, and experience we had in this strange 20 days of our life.
Thank you very much, Enrico. It's all very impressive from a logistical point of view, and thank you also for sharing a few tips. And I appreciate the exercise is a bit difficult in the time frame, but I repeat for those who joined the session late that you can post questions on the chat function, and we will use all these questions to provide you with another session. Our second venue, and we have 6 more, but we'll have less time than the one at the end, but the second main speaker as a venue is the NEC in Birmingham in the UK. After Italy, Spain and France, UK is also severely hit, and Ian Taylor, the NEC's managing director, will now provide his insight. The floor is yours, Ian.
Thank you, Christian, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you to UFI and to AIPC for the opportunity to talk, and thank you to everybody for sparing the time to join us on this session today. I feel somewhat daunted following that excellent presentation by Enrico. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk probably for about 10 minutes around our experiences at the NEC in Birmingham. Try and play a short piece of film as well to give you some sense of what the project has looked like. If I can start with essentially an introduction to the NEC. So for those of you that aren't aware, NEC is the National Exhibition Centre in the UK. We have 182,000 square metres of exhibition space. And on our campus, we also have a 15,000 capacity arena. We were opened in 1976. So a long-standing exhibition venue and venue management company. And since 2015, we've been in private sector ownership. So our current owner is Blackstone, a large US-based private equity company. So that, I think, maybe is some useful context for everyone. I guess from our perspective in the UK, we were possibly a little bit after in terms of some of the measures that were taken around Europe, perhaps a week or two downstream from that. And I think we had social distancing restrictions and lockdown, if I can use that phrase, introduced in kind of mid-March, a few days after that. And the first contact we had at the venue around the potential to be used as a field hospital, which is the phrase that's been used particularly in the UK quite a lot, was actually on, I think it was on the 24th of March. So what I want to do is really to talk through some headlines around what our learnings have been from this experience and some of the processes that we put in place and some of the experiences that we've had in the hope that that can be helpful if anybody else should find themselves in a similar situation. So I guess the first thing to say is that our initial contact from the government essentially was through the National Health Service, the NHS, but it was NHS centrally in the UK. So we had a series of meetings over 24 to 48 hours in the venue itself with the leads from National Health England and also incredibly important, and they played a fantastic role, UK military emergency planners as well. So we spent 2 to 3 days in the venue and were then joined very quickly by our regional National Health Service colleagues. And we very quickly began to move into what the facility could be used for and what the key phases of the project were going to be. From an NEC perspective, we identified quite early on that there was going to be a 5-phase approach to the project from our perspective as a venue. And those 5 phases were around essentially ensuring phase 1 that the legal framework was clear and in place. The financial framework was the second phase. The third phase is what we called mobilization. Phase 4 is around operational delivery, and phase 5 is return to business as usual. So I'm sure none of those phases will come as a surprise to anybody. And what I want to do for the next sort of 10 minutes is just talk through what some of the key elements have been in those phases, and as I say, what some of the key learning points were. I think what we recognised very early on in this process, literally on day 1 or 2, was that there is no playbook for creating this kind of facility in the way that it needed to be done. We recognised that there was a huge degree of urgency, and it was a very, very fluid situation, which from an operational perspective, in terms of planning and delivery, I think calls for very strong situational awareness and an acceptance that it means there's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of conversations, and that means people have to take a very flexible and a very patient approach. We found what helped us enormously in that process was to set a communication structure internally very quickly, which involved as many people as possible from the senior teams and the operational teams, and that those teams would be gathering on a daily basis, usually not face-to-face, which was one of the additional challenges that we came across with this project. All of the planning elements and the delivery elements had to be delivered and are being delivered in a way that's very mindful of social distancing. So the use of technology obviously became very key, and we found an end-of-day call for the key teams within our business, summarising everything that had happened that day, tracking the key actions that needed to be addressed the following day. For the first week to 10 days of the project became a very useful thing for us to do. I think the other key challenge very early in the project that we recognised, we were dealing with a different range of initial stakeholders. So we were dealing with NHS Central, we were dealing with NHS at a regional level, and we were also dealing with a lot of suppliers and contractors to the NHS. So with that kind of mix in mind, it was quite challenging to map the decision making and the influence structures of the various organisations that we were dealing with and are dealing with, and then try to make sure that we had a process to get key decisions decided and points of escalation if we needed them. And I think I'd speak on behalf of all of the organisations involved, the NHS centrally and regionally, their contractors, the military, the venue, we all had to map each other's structures as quickly as we possibly could and understand the stakeholder environment that we were dealing with. Where we ended up from an NEC perspective was essentially developing what we called a license to occupy the venue, which was agreed with National Health England, and then a series of service agreements with National Health regionally, because it would be the National Health teams regionally that would actually be operating the facility. And clearly, one of the things we had to work very hard on with those partners was understanding the requirements and the facilities and the way that they were going to be used, but also trying to make sure that we had good visibility on what level of service provision that they wanted. Was it the type of services that we could deliver ourselves as a venue, or was it specialist clinical services that needed to be pulled in from elsewhere? So as I say, that phase project management plan was very helpful. We recognized very early on that those 5 phases were likely to be running concurrently with each other. And I think one of the things that we found most useful and are still working through at the moment, as we've given the venue over in various parts, we made sure that we agreed with the National Health Service nationally and regionally, and with all of the individual contractors, that we had a very clear set of condition surveys for the type of condition we were handing the venue over in, because as we all know, it's going to be used for a very different purpose to that which it's normally used for. And we wanted to make sure very early on that we had an eye on how we could quickly and efficiently get back to business as usual. And we felt that well-produced and agreed condition surveys were going to be very important in terms of helping us to do that. So what I'm going to try and do now, if I can make the technology work, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to play a piece of film, which is a time lapse, which hopefully now everybody can see. And I'm just going to talk over this as we go, and kind of finish the key points that I was alluding to. I think probably the biggest lesson that we would take from this, and the one that we would pass on, is the importance of clear and frequent communications in terms of your own teams, the stakeholder teams, but also your customers as well. We were very, very aware that a lot of our customers at the NEC, who we'd been in incredibly close contact with for the 2-month period prior to that, I think for April, May and June, we'd rescheduled something like 60 exhibitions into the latter half of the year. And clearly our customers were going to be aware of what was happening in the country, very aware of it indeed, and would see what was going on in the media. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't just communicate with our own staff and our venue stakeholders, but we had a communication strategy in place with our customers so we could tell them what was happening to their venue and what it was being used for. And I think we were very mindful of the fact that the agreement that we had in place with the health service had some very clear confidentiality clauses within it. So we were clear that there were certain things we couldn't share that our customers would like us to, but we made sure that we communicated with our customers both en masse and individually, alongside communicating with all of our other stakeholders, which hopefully gave them some clarity and some comfort as to what their venue was being used for, but also enables us to get back to business as usual, hopefully as quickly as we possibly can. I think the final area I would want to focus on, I'm conscious of time, would be to talk about the importance of people and the toll that this has on people, both individually and as teams. It's really important, we felt, to recognise that everybody involved in the project will find it incredibly stressful. They'll be placed under all kinds of pressures, and therefore engaging HR teams internally and making sure that you have a mechanism in place to check in on groups of people and individuals on a daily basis and look after their well-being as closely as possible was incredibly important for us. We recognised as well that everybody across the business wanted to help and wanted to get involved. So there was a fantastic sense of coming together and delivering as part of the national effort. But again, that takes a toll. Like Enrico's teams, we worked for 20, 21 days solid, often around the clock. So trying to introduce a degree of succession planning and succession capability in the teams to make sure people get relevant downtime and get a bit of respite was incredibly important. I guess the other thing I would say is we recognised early on that there was a number of services that the NHS were going to want to use their own procurement framework to deliver. They have clearly huge contracts in place with lots of organisations, and we felt it was really important that we respected that. We had a huge amount of support from industry suppliers and venue partners in the UK, all of whom were desperate to help. But the NHS were very clear that we needed to go through their procurement network. So we had a secondary piece of communication and stakeholder management, responding to people who were desperate to help and provide their services, everybody from electricians to stand builders to IT providers, to make sure that their offers of help were being acknowledged, but also making it clear that there was a process that everybody would need to go through in order to provide a level of services. And really, just to finish off, talking about services, I think Enrico mentioned it, the impact of this type of facility, a field hospital, on existing IT systems. At a time when our IT system was supporting hundreds and hundreds of people working from home, which had of course placed a degree of stress on us, we were then asked in very short order to support an entire hospital operating in our venue off more or less the same IT infrastructure. So it often gets overlooked in the rush to kind of build a physical facility, but we were very, very mindful of the impact this had on our own IT teams and our IT providers, and that team was at the absolute forefront of making sure that our own network and infrastructure remained robust, but also it could support the operation of the hospital in as quick a way as possible. So I guess that was really the key headlines from an NEC perspective. We were very clear from the outset of the project we were going to do everything we possibly could to play our part in the UK. The hospital is up and running and now ready to receive patients. And we are still very focused on how we can maintain the services that we've obviously partnered with the NHS to deliver, but equally we want to see the day quickly when we're welcoming event activity back to the NEC and indeed every venue around the country. So we continue to operate those work streams, not least of all our business as usual approach.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's again a lot of useful tips, I believe, and thank you also for the time you take to share all these with us. As I indicated earlier, we now have a series of additional cases, but with limited time for each of them, just 3 to 5 minutes, to give each a flavor of the way they handled this in different parts of the world or different countries. So let's start with Asia, and I'm going now to invite Aloysius again from Singex in Singapore.
Hello, everyone. In Singapore, we had an unfortunate turn of events where we saw a second spike. And to date, we have close to about 8,000 cases. And the second spike arose from the foreign workers' dormitories that are housed in different parts in Singapore. And as we speak, the swab tests are still ongoing, and we expect more cases to come on stream. On the 4th of April, the government, together with my shareholder, which is known as Temasek Holdings, got together to say that we need to activate large-scale facilities in order to cater to what we foresee was a great flow of COVID patients coming in from the dormitories. As a result, we were given quite a short time, 5 days to be exact, to get the facility ready. The key difference from what we have heard from NEC as well as from Fiera Milano is that this is not a hospital per se, it is called a care facility. This care facility is aimed at providing patients who have early symptoms and those on the road to recovery. And they cater primarily for patients who are between 18 to 35 or 40. In other words, relatively young. Why this was key is because the Singapore government wanted to relieve the stress on the hospitals so that they can take care of more serious cases. And the expo, where my facility is to take care of those who are fairly young and whereby the system, the body system, will be able to fight off or shed the virus as the weeks go by. So that's the understanding and the position that the facility here took. So it's a step-down care compared to what a full-fledged hospital would be. So in 5 days, we had to prepare close to about 3,000 beds across 6 halls. So it was really 24/7, no different from what we heard from Fiera Milano and NEC. And we stayed focused and worked very much closely with the Ministry of Health, the Health Ministry over here in Singapore, together with a multi-agency as well as multi-enterprise. So I worked with my sister companies to set up the facility. Indeed, it's very key in being a facility manager. We would know how the facility operates, and because of the short time to get it live, it's very important that you be part of the coordinating committee, in which we were, and I was part of, and I am still part of the coordinating committee, together with the Ministry of Health and other agencies, in order to ensure that we've got the facility up and running. A key thing is that this facility, just like many others, runs 24/7. It's the first time ever, and you're going to go for perhaps a couple of months. We do not know. But what's important is to be very clear as to the needs of such care facility. And one of the key things which we would find is the need to be very clear about engineering capabilities of the facility. Because of the COVID virus, it's important to understand how the virus thrives and where the virus dies. And one of the key things in terms of creating a decontamination outfit for such a large scale is to flex the pressure. So working with my engineers as well as specialized expertise, we came in with a dual pressure system, which is a positive pressure for what we call the clean zones, and negative pressure for what we call the red zones. So the red zones are those with COVID patients lying. And that will be important that we create a curtain such that you're able to contain and flush out the COVID virus and augment it by what we call air ducts to suck up the air. So that was quite key. And we got all the engineering experts to come up within 24 hours so that we're able to get the facility up and running. The second part, and many would have shared with that, but I thought I emphasize on this point, and given the short 2-3 minutes that I have left, is the need to bear in mind evacuation. Now, because you have 3,000 and maybe 5,000 or even 1,000 patients, you have to be mindful of where are your evacuation procedures like, because it will involve both patients as well as the workers. And you will have both patients which are infected and those who are not. So when you have emergency evacuations, it's important to bear in mind how are you going to facilitate the emergency evacuation. Of course, we all hope we don't have to go through that situation, but you must bear in mind because it's quite complicated, because you will need to minimally have a mask on for everybody, so as to minimize not just escaping from the emergency, but also not to be infected by those who are there. So that's something we need to be needs to be thought through for facility managers, and it's quite a monumental task, and you need to think through together with the fire emergency rescue operations teams that you have in your respective countries. And I think these are key things where, apart from the need to work closely together, have a central command and control, of which the facility manager must be in place, for the simple reason that we know our facilities well and we're able to troubleshoot. And because it is a 24/7 operation, one needs to be able to foresee and preempt hiccups that will come our way. So these are things which I thought would be important to bear in mind as on Singapore's side. We have, in fact, I've just completed the facility just about a few days ago, and it's running, and we will probably be expanding the facility because of the huge numbers of the foreign workers that we have here in Singapore. But as we speak, I've already activated 4 halls to cater for another 3,000 patients. We hope we don't have to use it, but at least you prepare in advance. I think that's something we need to be very clear when you work with the authorities to size up the flow, size up the patients that are coming in, so that you won't be caught off guard, and you prepare the facility in anticipation of a larger demand, which of course we hope will not happen, but it's important for us to make sure that we are ready for any eventuality. Thank you.
Thank you, Aloysius, and sorry for the time constraint. I realize it's complicated. Next one on the list is Pamela Pascual from the WTC Metro Manila in the Philippines. Pamela, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, but I can't.
Your turn,
video.
please.
I don't have a video. It says the host has stopped showing the video. But anyway, is that all right? I can begin without it.
Just keep to speaking then, please, because we're limited with time, unfortunately.
That's right. Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I represent the World Trade Center Metro Manila. This is in the Philippines. We are a premier accredited member of the World Trade Centers Association that's headquartered in New York, USA. It is a privately run company. We're ISO certified, and we're part of a medium-sized conglomerate that's called the ICCP Group. Now, the Philippines, or the Luzon, an island in the Philippines where Metro Manila is, went on lockdown middle of March. And going into lockdown meant the government encouraged the avoidance of mass gatherings, and therefore the exhibitions business, which is really the primary business of the World Trade Center Metro Manila, most of the events that we had scheduled in March and April naturally had to be canceled. And because of the availability now of our exhibition space, we were one of the first few buildings that were tapped by government to be used as either a command center or testing center for the COVID-19. As you know, the Philippine government is very strong in its fight to quell or to stop the rapid spread of the virus. And there were already so many actions that were undertaken by, and one of those is really creating or establishing quarantine facilities in Metro Manila for one, as a start. No? So World Trade Center Metro Manila, being one of the largest exhibition halls in Metro Manila, was tapped, and we were approached by another private company to convert the exhibition hall into a quarantine facility. It's a healthcare facility. So, well, the very first concern that I had, being the head of the World Trade Center Metro Manila, is, are we going to offer the facility where government would have to pay for the costs to operate the facility, or we will be doing this as part of our corporate social responsibility work, no? And with the blessings of the board and the chairman of the company, we offered the exhibition hall rent-free for use by government for it to be converted into a quarantine facility. And with the help of another partner, another private company, who took care of the build-up of the cubicles, now totaling 502 beds in our exhibition hall. The entire building is now fully set up. Everything has been taken care of by private sector in as far as in as far as setting up the conversion of the quarantine facility. And the mezzanine level where the function rooms are going to be used as sleeping quarters of the health workers. The medical operation will be handled by government through the armed forces of the Philippines medical team. And they've been able to set up the triage service in the loading bay. We've been able to identify which ones are the red zone and the green zone. The green zone would be basically where the main lobby is, so that the health workers and the volunteers could be allowed to freely move around or move about in the lobby, to give them a lot of, a lot of walking space. No? So the exhibition hall will be very confined, and it's assigned to be the red zone, so there will only be authorized people to enter the exhibition hall, and that's basically the medical team. So what we saw here in this particular partnership is the private and the public sector coming together to put together this facility. And the arrangement is, while another private sector, a private company is taking care of the build-up of the cubicles and the provision of the beds, and a lot of hotels came forward to donate bed sheets and beddings and pillows and towels and all that. And another company provided gallons and gallons and truckloads of alcohol, and a lot more other things that were donated. No? And in fact, even toiletries were donated. Biohazardous plastic bags have also been donated. So for the most part, what World Trade Center has been able to do, while we have provided the exhibition space for free for the use of government, we've been able to consciously put down the costs, the exposure of the company in terms of operating the building, because the electric company has graciously waived electricity bills for the period while the quarantine facility is in operation. And the water utility company has also come forward to take care of the water bills. So for the most part, those are the two largest items in our costs to run the building. No? So that being taken care of, we've now been able to put down the exposure of the company, and the only thing that's left really is manpower, because of course World Trade Center will be operating the air conditioning, will be operating the lights and the escalators. So basically all the mechanical and electrical systems of the building will be still operated by our people. Now, in as far as the actual turnover of the building is concerned, it will be taken care of now by the armed forces. When we turned over a few days ago the building to them, we clearly distinguished or determined and identified which equipment they will be taking care of or handling, and which ones will be on our responsibility. No? So the next item that's really of a main concern for us in the beginning was really what type of profile of patients will be accepted, because the building, being an exhibition hall, is really not built as a hospital. So definitely the filters, the type of filters in our air conditioning system, and this was mentioned by Aloysius earlier, we do not have hospital grade filters in our air conditioning system. So definitely it will be, a grave concern if government will admit moderate to severe cases of patients. No? But then again, that was really putting it out there in the table with discussions with the Department of Health. Finally, they've decided that it will be easier in a situation and setup like this for them to admit COVID positive patients, but mild and asymptomatic patients. It will be easier for them to manage similar patients with similar conditions in that particular kind of setup. So that being settled, so we're actually waiting for government to start operation in probably in a couple of days. And what's really as part of the management company, of course, what we're really concerned about is the winding down of the operation, because we don't know until when this will last. Being in this business, before COVID started, we were actually starting to expand the building already to add more exhibition space to capture greater demand for the Philippines. But we were caught by surprise, unfortunately, and unexpectedly. We had to put a stop to all of our plans. But we're really, at this point, waiting for all of this to really normalize so that we can go back to business. And the other last thing that we're really concerned about is really the stigma, how to address the stigma attached to being a COVID facility marketing-wise. So that's something that we are already trying to address at this point, and we're creating a lot of media mileage about this corporate social responsibility that World Trade Center has been doing. And we will really put the message across that once all of this is over and the building has been turned over back to us, then and the building has been declared COVID-free after disinfection and sanitation, including air conditioning ducts and carpets and everything else. So, we're just really very eager to go back to business, although we don't know when that will be. We're trying to keep a very positive mindset, but also keeping in mind that this will not really end very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. You did cover a lot in your expose, and touching the financial element, which I guess is crucial for some venues. Let's try for the next speakers to stick to 3 to 5 minutes maximum. Otherwise, it's not fair really for those who can't stay longer. So next is Germany. Andreas, please.
Yes. Hello. Good morning and have a nice day to all of you. I would just like to mention a few facts about Hanover, because we have such a temporary COVID hospital on our venue as well. Those who are not familiar with Hanover, our venue is about almost 400,000 square meters exhibition area gross in 25 halls. Every hall is different, and the medium size of each hall is like, I would say, 15,000 square meters gross. And we got a first call on 18th of March from our local authorities if we might use some of our halls for temporary facilities as hospital. And we get a green go for it 23rd of March. It took like 2 weeks of construction, and just before Easter on 10th of April, we had our first test run of this hospital, not with real patient, of course, but just a test run. So it took us like 2 weeks to do all construction, purchasing and construction of that hospital. I have to mention that we do this as a service provider for the region of Hanover, who told us to do so and who are going to pay for this. And the medical, let's say, key element of that project is done by the Medical Hospital University of Hanover, the Medizinische Hochschule Hanover. So they care about the medical part of this. And we turned one hall 19, into the temporary hospital. The exhibition area of that hall is 15,000 square meters gross. This hall is ready for 460 patients, 460 beds, and we use the surrounding facilities as storage or supporting facility. Next to this hall, we have the north entrance. The north entrance was turned into the reception of that hotel. We have 2 additional halls for storage. We have another hall for the logistics in and out, and also another hall for the staff changing rooms, shower facilities, and catering. So 5 halls plus 1 entrance facility we are using for such kind of temporary hospital, but just 1 hall as the real hospital. So the red zone, as you called it before by other speakers. The overall area for this kind of use is about 60 to 70,000 square meters. We purchased already equipment or services for more than 10 million euro. And I would like to say maybe the most risky part of this for Deutsche Messe is that we did all those purchasing without having a real signed contract. So the contract was negotiated parallel to all this. So the biggest issue is trust among all those parties who are involved. I know that other venues in Germany have similar temporary hospitals. So as you might know, most of the venues in Germany, we have local shareholders like Deutsche Messe Hanover, 50% owned by the city of Hanover and 50% by the state of Niedersachsen, like Lower Saxony. We also have the situation in Germany that till end of August, it's forbidden to have any kind of bigger gatherings of people, bigger events. So it's forbidden to have exhibitions, events, conferences, concerts, sporting events till end of August. So otherwise there would be no other business on our venue, of course, with a view upon this kind of decision done by German government last week. On the other hand, I would like to stress one element, because we are really trying to work on lobbying, trying to persuade politicians that exhibitions are not the fun element like concerts or sport events, but instead we are accelerator for any kind of business or facilitator of business. So we try to care a lot about to be among the first elements or parties to be allowed to reopen our business again, and not to be at the very last end of events to be reopened, like sport events or concerts. I guess that's important for all of us to be regarded as business to business events and business facilitators and not fun elements. I would like to summarize that doing this kind of temporary hospital led to really high motivation among all our staff, all our employees, shareholders, of course, supervisory board, all our customers and the public in Hanover and Hanover region and the state of Niedersachsen. So it was very good for our reputation. We've been very proud to be part against this coronavirus, and I think it was a very good experience for us. But once again, on this timeline and during this period, most important was trust among all different partners involved, the medical parties involved, the military service who supply the major part of the medical staff, local authorities and all other parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas, and also for touching this topic of reopening and lobbying, which UFI is also working on a different scale.
I think that's most important for all of us, getting back into business once.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to Spain and Mr. Lopez Puertas from IFEMA, please.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Well, our situation was a little different, you know, as from the 14th of March, the government just proposed the national emergency for all the country, in which we're not able to do any event. And as from that, what we did, as we were absolutely closed and working from home, was just to put for their disposal all the venue. As from there, we had on the 16th of March, you know, the town hall asked us to provide one of the halls for a homeless facility up to 300 beds, and we actually have 150 beds, and we have already 4 TV areas, so 1 gym, 300 beds, a play area, a smoking area. So that's something that we already started on the 16th of March. And on the 20th of March, I received a phone call from the regional health service, in which they were absolutely crowded in the hospitals in Madrid. There was no room for any other sick people going to the hospital. And they had the idea of providing on an open space area that IFEMA could bring as a venue to build a hospital up to 5,500 beds. And the best situation was that the following day, we needed to have some part of the hospital working. So that was a real challenge. And in the 18 hours, we were able to open one of the halls on a temporary situation, equipped with oxygen, medical gas, air extraction, and electricity to 400 beds. And we worked on the rest of the other 2 halls that we now have in place, just building some not so temporary, but with pipes, oxygen pipes. We built also a tank for 50,000 liters of oxygen, liquid oxygen, and everything was equipped in 4 days, which has been now working up to 1,400 beds. It has been really a challenge for all of the team of IFEMA, but also for the subcontractors, which was incredible the way they worked. Absolutely in working 24 hours a day and providing all the material, all the manpower and everything. Again, as some of you said, without any contract, but really providing that really good service. It's been really amazing, you know, the way we have built. It's up to 85,000 square meters, which are 3 halls dedicated to hospital with beds, with intensive care also facilities, 2 halls used as a warehouse, and the convention center used as dressing rooms, offices, restaurants, catering, and breaking room. The good thing of this is that actually, you know, there are more than 3,200 people that are already at home that came to IFEMA, and we have now only in use one of these halls, you know, the biggest one with around 700 people. So we are back to half of our capacity, our actual capacity. You know, we were thinking in building the rest of the venue, you know, as a hospital, but what we see is that most probably in the last day of May we will be able to close the whole hospital if the figures continue like that. Nevertheless, you know, as it has been a very big investment in terms of building all the resources, all the oxygen pipes and everything, that will be kept. We work, you know, beneath the floor of the halls, and that will be kept just in case in autumn, as it may seem, there's another peak and we need to reuse it. But we're also working in how to go back to normality and how to go back to work. Most probably until September, we will not be allowed to do any events. And as from that, what we ask the regional government is to go for having the access to university exams, which in Spain will be made as from the 6th to the 8th of July, if everything goes as it seems, just as a matter of closing the hospital and dedicating the venue to some other activities which will start to concentrate on really going on back to normality. And that's the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've added some interesting elements here as well. Let's move to Canada. Laura.
Thank you, Christian. and hello to all of our colleagues around the world. Exhibition Place is located in Toronto, Canada, and we are municipally owned. We're a 192-acre multi-purpose fairground site, which is home to NEC Centre, Canada's largest convention and exhibition centre at 93,000 square meters. In addition to NEC Centre, we also have several connected and standalone exhibition halls, a hotel, and over 11 independent tenants across the site. The COVID-19 pandemic hit Toronto in late February with small numbers of travel-related cases. As with other cities around the world, the virus moved into community transmission. And as of yesterday, Toronto had 3,346 confirmed cases of COVID-19. While our mitigation efforts have shown some evidence of flattening the curve, the main source of the virus transmission has moved into congregate settings, specifically long-term care homes and the shelter system for the homeless. Toronto Public Health and the City of Toronto Shelter Services mobilized in early March to relocate homeless shelter residents to vacant hotels and community centers to promote physical distancing. On March the 21st, Exhibition Place was called upon as a site for a temporary emergency shelter for the homeless. As the venue owner, we decided to utilize one of our standalone exhibition halls, which is approximately 18,500 square meters. This venue is rather isolated on our grounds and physically separated from our other tenants. Initially, the request was for a 50-bed facility. However, we have had previous experience with emergency winter respite on our site, and we anticipated that the requirement for more beds would grow as the pandemic picked up pace. So we immediately started to prep the building for a 100% occupancy. Converting an exhibition hall to a temporary shelter comes with its own set of operational issues, and based on our previous experience, we were able to implement our best practices. We entered into an MOU with the city, which clearly defined the roles and responsibilities of the setup and the operation of the emergency respite. It defined that the move-in labor and the venue prep would be provided by our employees and third-party service contractors. However, when the first occupant arrived, the emergency shelter would be required to provide all of its own staff and contracted services. Since March 21st, the planning has been very fluid. The emergency shelter ultimately evolved into a 400-bed COVID-positive recovery center, where homeless shelter patients who had tested positive and were either asymptomatic or not sick enough to be hospitalized would be admitted. This reinforced our decision to keep our employees safe and not to enter the venue. In fact, just 3 days ago, we were advised that a field hospital would be added within the recovery center, which will now escalate the level of medical care offered in the venue. Our internal teams have been liaising with multiple clients, the City of Toronto, shelter services, third-party contractors, and Doctors Without Borders. Specific considerations for using the venue as a temporary emergency facility included enhancing our security measures, including the temporary installation of 92 security cameras and a full perimeter fence around the exterior of the building. Shelter residents don't necessarily follow typical societal rules, and keeping a COVID-positive asymptomatic patient in a building requires these security measures to keep them in the building. We installed a temporary Wi-Fi network, just as the NEC, over 200 smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, shower trailers, food service areas, hand wash units, and enough electrical supply that wouldn't require re-entry of contractors once the COVID recovery center and field hospital opened. We included termination language that defined a move-out date, which was contingent upon the lifting of the public health orders in order to assist us in the recovery phase of our commercial operations as Canada's largest convention and exhibition site. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Laura, for adding another component with this homeless solution. So the next speaker we've got today is from GL Events, and because their range of activity covers all segments of our activity, and they also have a strong international reach, I thought it was interesting to have them to conclude this session before I do a few final words. Sébastien?
Yes, thank you, Christian. Thank you, UFI and AIPC for the invitation, and thank you to all the speakers. It's been very instructive and insightful. So I must say that we have been approached by local authorities or by associations or foundations everywhere in the world or in all the countries where we are active to build either hospitals or care facilities in Brazil, Hungary, South Africa, childcare centers, clean rooms for mask confection, logistics centers, testing centers, homeless shelters, helipads. And we also have a partnership with the World Central Kitchen Foundation in Barcelona. So it's been a lot of requests, which we have obviously accepted with joy, if I may say, and happy to serve the communities. And my feeling, what I wanted to share with you as per Christian's request, was her views on all this. And I guess it's been said today, you know, events at the end of the day, events venues and events industry is about modularity. It's about versatility. Sorry, it's about being able to repurpose a venue, and all these under rapid deployment capacities. And I think that all of us, all of you, have shown this, and I think we can be very proud of the way that the events industry has been reacting to this, or even being proactive, because in many cases we have been approaching the authorities, offering our venues and services. And I think this is we can be very proud of this, and we should. We've been approached for many reasons, as I said. Also, I didn't mention other examples, but we do serve the communities, building or at least you know, accommodating people against the risk of domestic violence, for example. So there's many things we can do and we should do, and I can tell you that even without building a hospital, you can bring a lot to your communities. And as I think Ian mentioned, or Andreas, there's also, and Enrico, there's also many things we can do in between the dismantling of those sanitary facilities and the reopening of events. Exams, as you said, we've been approached by companies willing to build drive-in movie theaters for either, you know, movies or sports broadcast. And of course, we have large space. We can accommodate social distancing for activities which would have to take place into smaller venues somehow. So, of course, we're not going to be doing this for free forever, but we are showing to the world that our venues can be used for many purposes. One of the things I wanted to mention as well, because I think this is a message of hope, we have seen how countries which are further away from what was what still is the main focus of the pandemic. I mean, after Asia and Europe, we've seen countries taking measures and taking initiatives very early on in the process. We've been approached in South Africa, we've been approached in Brazil, even before there was maybe less than 100 cases identified in the countries, maybe less, probably less. And I think this is a message of hope that some emerging countries are, of course, aware of the lack of urgent care and intensive care facilities, and they've been approaching us and other venue holders to be able to have hospitals and accommodation and restaurant for their staff installed very quickly and before they really needed those. So I hope this is positive for the future. I'm sure I'm already away of my 3 minutes, so I will leave the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sébastien, for this broad overview and messages of hope included in that. So we've almost finished with this session, and I would like to thank all our speakers for their time, their experience sharing. I would also, of course, would like to thank each of you for taking part in this, especially those who are in Asia. It's almost midnight there for some of you. I would also like to thank my colleagues who are in the background and helped putting all this up. As mentioned earlier, we plan to have a more focused Q&A session on the same theme soon, and we'll use the question and answers that you posted in the chat to build that if we have enough. In the meantime, we have a next UFI Connect next Wednesday, and maybe Pascal will load that up. That's it. And we have a program, a permanent program, which is on our website, and you can join in the same way as you did today. Last but not least, if Pascal can move to the next slide, it's important to thank our diamond sponsors. So TCEP, the Qatar National Tourism Council, Change the World, and Freeman, because they help our activities at UFI in addition to all UFI members. So thank you again. I wish you all to stay healthy, and all the best from the UFI team.
Bye-bye. Thank you.